Parents didn't realize their son stepped out of the car on a safari. What the lion did is shocking. It was a crisp, clear morning on the open plains of Africa, a place where adventure and danger seemed to lurk behind every swaying blade of tall grass. The landscape stretched endlessly under a wide open sky, dotted with trees and the occasional shadow of a distant animal moving through the brush. Paul and Sarah had brought their youngest son, Jacob, on this safari trip as a way to introduce him to the wonder of nature, hoping to give him a memory he would cherish forever. They felt safe inside their rugged safari vehicle, surrounded by metal and thick glass windows, with Sam, their experienced guide, at the wheel. The whole family was captivated by the raw beauty around them, blissfully unaware of how close they were to a heart-stopping moment. Jacob, sitting in the back, was wide-eyed with curiosity, unable to look away from the view outside his window. Every rustle in the grass, every flicker of movement seemed to draw his attention. He was at that perfect age where the world seemed magical, a place filled with endless possibilities. His eyes scanned the horizon, eager to catch sight of any animal that dared cross their path. The adults, meanwhile, were busy chatting with Sam, who was telling them stories of past safari encounters, including close calls with lions. His deep voice and calm mannerisms made them feel safe, even as he described the unpredictable nature of the animals around them. But as Sam talked, their focus began to shift. They didn't notice Jacob's little hand reaching for the door handle in the back seat. His eyes fixed on something outside, something only he could see. They were too engrossed in Sam's tales of prowling lions and roaming elephants. His stories painted a vivid picture of life and survival in the wild. For a moment they felt like they were part of that world, sharing the wisdom and respect Sam had for the animals around them. Welcome back to Plot Twister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. Then, in the middle of a story, Paul glanced to his right, expecting to see his son's bright face through the window. But the seat was empty, and the door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down his spine, and in an instant he realized Jacob was no longer in the car. His heart skipped a beat, the creeping fear hitting him before he could even process what had happened. Jacob stood just outside the safari vehicle, his small figure barely noticeable against the vast landscape around him. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the plains, and a light breeze whispered through the tall grass. Everything felt still and peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if the wilderness was holding its breath, waiting for something. Jacob took a few steps forward, his attention captured by something shimmering in the distance. It could have been anything, maybe a glint of sunlight on a rock, or the rustling movement of an animal. To him, it was a mystery waiting to be uncovered. Back in the car, Paul and Sarah continued their conversation with Sam, blissfully unaware of Jacob's absence. Sam was midway through a story about a recent sighting of a pride of lions, when he noticed a flicker of movement outside the vehicle. For a second, he thought it might have been a shadow cast by a swaying tree, or perhaps a bird swooping low. But something in his gut told him otherwise. Paul glanced over, following Sam's gaze, and felt a sharp jolt of panic surge through him as he saw his son's small figure a few yards away from the car, completely alone. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the scene. There was Jacob, standing with his back to the vehicle, seemingly oblivious to everything around him. Her heart hammered in her chest, the realization crashing down on her with a weight that felt impossible to bear. Jacob was out there, vulnerable in the middle of the wild, with nothing to protect him. Jacob, on the other hand, seemed calm, even mesmerized. His gaze was fixed ahead, and his posture was relaxed, unaware of the invisible danger surrounding him. Each step he took felt innocent, as though he were walking through his backyard instead of a safari filled with animals whose instincts were unpredictable. He paused now and then, crouching to inspect a stone or bending to look at something in the grass. From the vehicle, the adults remained frozen, their breaths held as they watched, not daring to make a sound. It was as if time had slowed, each passing second stretching longer than the one before, amplifying the fear that pulsed between them. They knew they were only moments away from a potentially life-altering encounter, and there was nothing they could do but watch. Jacob stood there, completely captivated by the world around him, while just a few yards away, hidden among the tall grass, a lion prowled. The animal was barely visible, a shadow shifting quietly, its golden eyes trained on the small figure wandering the open space. The lion's body moved with fluid, silent strength, each step bringing it closer to the unaware child. It seemed to blend with the land, every movement deliberate, as if considering its next action. In the vehicle, Paul's heart pounded in his chest, every beat thudding louder than the last. He could feel the weight of fear pressing down on him, rooting him to his seat. His mind raced as he took in the sight of his son alone in the wild, a small, vulnerable figure standing in stark contrast to the surrounding expanse. He could barely breathe, his gaze fixed on Jacob, watching helplessly as the lion's presence came closer. Beside him, Sarah clutched the edge of her seat, her knuckles white, her breath held. She could hardly process what she was seeing, her instincts torn between the urge to rush to her son and the warning they had received to remain still. Her eyes darted between Jacob and the flicker of movement in the grass, terror tightening its grip on her. She could see the lion's powerful frame now, a mere 20 feet from Jacob, close enough that every tense muscle in its body was visible. Jacob, blissfully unaware, bent down to examine a tiny insect crawling over a leaf. He was utterly absorbed, his world narrowed to the ground at his feet, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding just a few steps away. To him, this was just another moment of discovery, another wonder in a place filled with mystery. His small frame seemed dwarfed by the land, innocent and exposed, a stark contrast to the sleek, muscular predator stalking nearby. The guide, Sam, barely moved, his eyes on the scene before him. A lifetime of experience had taught him to read the behavior of animals, but even he could sense the tension in the air. The lion's posture was calm yet alert, its attention solely on Jacob, a mix of curiosity and purpose in its gaze. Each passing second stretched on, thick with the possibility of what might happen next. No one spoke, no one moved, as they watched the fragile boundary between safety and danger grow thinner by the moment. The lion moved closer, its powerful form emerging slowly from the cover of the grass, its golden coat blending seamlessly with the dusty earth. Muscles rippled under its sleek fur as it stepped with an eerie, almost graceful silence, its eyes never leaving Jacob. It was so close now that its low, rhythmic beating seemed to fill the space around them. Though Jacob remained oblivious, crouched down and still captivated by the insect crawling along a stone, Paul felt his pulse quicken, his heart racing in his chest, hammering in a way he had never felt before. He was utterly frozen, torn between terror and helplessness as he watched the lion inching closer to his son. Every instinct screamed at him to protect Jacob, but his body refused to move, pinned by the weight of fear and the uncertainty of what any sudden action might provoke. He shot a glance at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with horror, her hand covering her mouth as she struggled to keep silent. She, too, was paralyzed by the sight of the lion drawing nearer, each step slow and calculated. Jacob stood up, brushing his hands on his shorts, and finally looked up, his gaze traveling across the open space before him. For the first time, he noticed the massive, silent creature watching him with an intensity he didn't yet understand. He froze, his small frame dwarfed by the lion's powerful stance, his innocent eyes meeting the piercing gaze of the animal. In that instant, time seemed to stop, stretching out into a quiet, taut silence. The lion's head tilted slightly, its expression unreadable, a mixture of wild instinct and something else entirely. Sam watched with a mix of awe and dread. His years of guiding tourists had taught him to recognize the intent behind a predator's movements, and yet this was different. There was no sign of aggression in the lion's posture, no immediate threat in the way it held itself. But he knew better than to assume safety. His breath was shallow, his body tense as he monitored the situation, his experience wrestling with the unpredictable nature of the wild. The lion took another step, closer than before, its eyes locked on Jacob with a focus that was almost unsettling. Its gaze held a strange intensity, as though sizing up this tiny human standing before it. The entire scene held an unnatural stillness, the kind that comes right before something big happens, yet nobody could tell what that something might be. The silence grew heavy, thick with the possibility of both danger and something entirely unexpected. The lion paused just a few feet from Jacob, its intense gaze unwavering. For a moment, the massive creature simply stood there, as if studying him, as if caught in a strange curiosity about this tiny, fearless human in its territory. Jacob's eyes were wide, fixed on the lion's face, his body completely still, instinctively sensing that any sudden move might break this fragile calm. Paul and Sarah sat in the vehicle, barely breathing, their hands clenched, eyes wide with terror. They could see every detail of the lion now. The sheen of its coat under the sun, the sharpness in its eyes, and the ripple of its muscles as it shifted slightly, maintaining its position near Jacob. It was so close that they could see the light glinting off its massive paws, powerful enough to crush, but resting calmly against the ground. Then, in an unexpected turn, the lion tilted its head, almost as if assessing Jacob. It took a single step back, still watching him, its expression oddly calm. Slowly it began to circle him, each step careful and measured, not as a predator closing in on its prey, but rather as if guarding him. The lion's movements were deliberate, its gaze shifting back to the distant surroundings before returning to Jacob, as though checking for anything else that might intrude on this moment. Inside the vehicle, Sam's expression shifted from pure alarm to something closer to awe. He leaned forward, watching with a sense of wonder as the lion continued its gentle pacing around Jacob. It was behaving in a way he had rarely, if ever, seen in all his years on safari. This wasn't the behavior of a hunter. There was no aggression, no readiness to pounce. Instead, it seemed almost protective, an instinct Sam couldn't quite explain. Jacob, meanwhile, stayed rooted in place, his innocent gaze still fixed on the lion. He didn't scream, didn't cry. He just stood there, his small face a mixture of amazement and quiet trust, as if he somehow sensed he was safe. The lion circled him once more before settling down nearby, sitting with an almost regal stillness, watching over him as if he were part of its pride. It was a moment suspended in time, a scene that felt impossible. Both parents watching in stunned silence as their son remained in the company of a creature they had always thought of as a fierce predator. The wild had bent its rules, if only for a moment, and none of them dared to disturb it. Paul's heart thundered in his chest as he watched the lion sit calmly near his son, its powerful body relaxed but alert, as if on guard. The tension in the air was thick, each second stretching endlessly as everyone remained frozen, trying to make sense of what was unfolding before them. Paul's gaze shifted between his son and the lion, his mind grappling with both awe and disbelief. How was it possible that Jacob was standing merely feet from a lion, seemingly protected rather than threatened? Inside the vehicle, Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she clutched the seat. Her maternal instinct fought against her reason, wanting desperately to run to Jacob, but feeling the weight of Sam's warning to stay still. She could see that the lion wasn't showing signs of aggression, but her fear remained, mingling with an overwhelming sense of relief as each moment passed without harm. Then, with a quiet, gentle shift, the lion's gaze lifted from Jacob to the distant horizon, as if sensing something in the air. It stood slowly, giving one last lingering look to Jacob, then turned and padded away, melting back into the tall grass from where it had come. The powerful creature moved with grace, its tail swaying slowly until it vanished from sight, leaving only the rustle of grass behind. Paul and Sarah let out the breaths they hadn't realized they'd been holding, their bodies sagging with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Sam nodded to them, his own expression a mixture of wonder and disbelief, signaling that the coast was finally clear. Paul stepped out of the vehicle and hurried to his son, wrapping him in a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of Jacob's small, steady heartbeat against his chest. Jacob looked up at his father, eyes bright, as though he had just been given the most extraordinary gift, one he couldn't quite understand but would never forget. Paul lifted him into his arms, cradling him as he walked back to the car, his mind still replaying the unbelievable scene. Inside, Sarah gathered Jacob close, her hands shaking slightly as she held him, overwhelmed by gratitude and the surreal memory that would forever be etched in their hearts. As they drove away, Sam quietly explained that sometimes, very rarely, wild animals sense innocence and vulnerability, responding with unexpected gentleness. It was one of nature's mysteries, he said, a reminder of how little humans truly understood about the creatures they shared the earth with. The family remained silent, each lost in thought, feeling both humbled and grateful for the rare, inexplicable mercy of the wild. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.